Hello, good morning, and welcome to the 10th and final lecture of the Southeast Asia Lecture Hall. I am Gusti Bagus Dharma Agastya, and I will be moderating today's session. Now, we are happy to say that throughout the past year, the Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia, or FPCI, has successfully convened the Southeast Asia Lecture Hall, which is a series of virtual lectures delivered by prominent academics and experts in their fields to students and lecturers across Southeast Asia. In the span of a year, we have managed to partner with 50 public and private universities across Southeast Asia, namely the American University of Phnom Penh, Binus University, Champasak University, Chiang Mai University, the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam, the Far Eastern University, FISIP Universitas Professor Dr. Mustopo, Institute of Business of Timor-Leste, International Islamic University of Malaysia, the LSPR Communication and Business Institute, Mahidol University, Monash University Malaysia, National University of Singapore, New Era University, Paragon International University, President University, Savannakhet University, Singapore Management University, the Singapore University of Social Sciences, Sophanavoang University, Sunway University, Thammasat University, the UCSI Malaysia, and UIN Sunan Ampel Surabaya, Universitas 17 Agustus 1945 Jakarta, Universitas Airlangga, Universitas Andalas, Universitas Bosowa, Universitas Budi Luhur, Universitas Gajah Mada, Universitas Hasanuddin, Universitas Jenderal Ahmad Yani, Universitas Kristen Satya Wacana, Universitas Mataram, Universitas Muhammadiyah Jember, Universitas Pasundan Bandung, Universitas Samratulangi, Universitas Selamat Riyadi, Universitas Sulawesi Barat, Universitas Sumatera Utara, Universitas Tanjung Pura, Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia, Universiti Malaya, Universiti Putra Malaysia, University of Mandalay, University of Nottingham, Malaysia, a Vietnam Academy of Social Sciences, Yale NUS College, and Yangon University of Economics. Thank you all, for our university partners, for your continued support and participation. Ladies and gentlemen, to deliver the final lecture, we are joined by Professor Dr. Dewi Fortuna Anwar. Professor Dewi is a research professor at the Research Center for Politics at the National Research and Innovation Agency, or BRIN. She also serves as the chairman of the board of directors at the Habibie Center, is a member of the Indonesian Academy of Sciences, AIPI, and is also the co-founder of the Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia, or FPCI. From August 2017 to August 2018, she was a distinguished visiting professor at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. She has written widely on Indonesia's foreign policy, Indonesia's democratization, as well as on ASEAN and regional political and security issues. Now, without further ado, Professor Dewi, the floor is yours for the next 60 minutes.
Thank you very much, Agus. It's a pleasure to join this very interesting event, the public lecture, and apparently this is the last public lecture by FPCI to a wide range of students around the region. So I'm very pleased and very proud to be invited to talk to you about international relations, and I've been asked to talk more about the general ideas of international relations. So, frankly, there's been a bit of a bother because my focus has mostly been about Indonesia's foreign policy, about ASEAN, about the Indo-Pacific, and so on. So now I'm going to talk slightly more generally about the international order, the evolving international system that we have, and particularly focusing on the roles and positions of the middle power. So my paper is called Evolving International System and Middle Power Moment. So next, please. Yeah. So if we look at the evolution of the international order, what kind of system, international system, who makes the rules, who are the main players. I will just look at the early 20th century until the mid 20th century, until between first and the First World War, and then the end of the Second World War, until a new international order evolved. The world was more or less characterized by multipolarity. Multipolarity is characterized by the presence of several powers with relatively equal capability, and therefore there was no hegemonic power which was predominant. Mostly determined, the international system was mostly determined by European powers. We know there's a lot of colonial powers like Britain, like France, like Germany. There's also Russia, but also the United States was just rising. China was also a power, but in relative decline. But Japan is on the rise, and that period during the early 20th century until the end of the World War II is really the periods of colonialism, and then we saw a lot of wars of national independence, and this so there's sort of rivalry between the primary actors, which of course led to the First World War. And then the Second World War. At that time, the loose alliances, search for balances between the various actors, but the balances was not stable. If we learn the history of Europe in the 19th century, there's shifting balances. For example, the UK throughout most of its history went to war against France, and Germany was its natural partner for much of its history. But for most of us, we only remember the First World War, the Second World War, where the main protagonists were, Britain against Germany. So there's no stable alliances at the time. Then the period of multipolarity ended with the end of the Second World Wars, and a new powers rise, the emergence of two superpowers. The United States, because most European countries were devastated because of the war, and the rise of new superpowers and the emergence of ideological conflicts. This took place, between the periods of 1949 till about 1990. A new bipolarity, power blocks, one led by the United States, the so-called free world, the Western Bloc, and the other one is led by the Soviet Union, the progressive bloc, the communist bloc. And that bipolarity really dominated the global order. We went through a period of so-called Cold War, although in the Cold War only took place between the primary actors, while there were a lot of hot wars which involved proxies. There were ideological alliances and military pacts, and countries were often forced to choose. And then there's also, the emergence of the non-aligned movement. So the bipolarity on the one hand, but also newly emerging countries, newly independent countries, including Indonesia, which formed the non-alignment movement in 1961, did not want to be part of this bipolar world. And then in 1990, we know that the Soviet Union collapsed. The bipolarity ended, and there's a brief period of what you might call a Pax Americana, unipolarity. The United States at the time was the only superpower remaining, and seemed to be the one that really shaped the international order. And also because of the end of the ideological conflict, Francis Fukuyama wrote about the end of history, that the world narrative is ending. This ideological competitions were really over, and that the whole world will be marching in one direction. free market economy, democracy, and then, this is the really affirmation of a US-led liberal hegemonic order. So we saw during this period, the unilateral intervention by the United States against countries like against Iraq and so on, without clear mandate from the Security Council, because the US could do it, because it had all of the power. So this is a brief introduction to the kind of international system that we are entering now, which is in fact international system still in flux. Next slide, please. Now, I would like to introduce to you the Lowy Institute. The Lowy Institute is an institute based in Sydney, which issues analysis of the power index of countries in Asia Pacific. There are about 25 Asia Pacific countries, which are analyzed based in 8 areas: economic resources, military capability, resilience, future resources, diplomatic influence, economic relationships, as well as defense networks. So these are very objective factors spread across all spectrums and really measured apple to apple. And I'm comparing the index of 2019 and 2020 and 2021, and you can see that a lot of the scores have actually dipped down. And according to this low power index, countries that achieve a score of 70 and above, within all 8 areas, and if they achieve a rank of a total score of 70 and above, they are superpowers. And for countries that score between 40 and 69, they're major powers. A score between 10 and 39, they are middle powers, and the score of less than 10 is minor powers. Now we are just focusing on this Asia Pacific countries, but as you can see that even at the global level, there are now 2 superpowers. Namely, one is the United States, which in 2019 had a total overall score of 84.5. But in 2021, maybe because of the COVID crisis and so on, the general global decline, because of it, we have all been suffering from the pandemic. The score has gone down to 82.2, but still way above every other country in the world. The second superpower is China, the People's Republic of China. In 2019, it achieved a cumulative score of 75.9, while in 2021, the score has gone down to 74.6. I'm sorry, because I seems to have mixed my point here. It should be point, yeah, because I wrote some in Indonesian style. So only 2 countries that have really emerged as superpowers now, namely the United States, still the overall superpower, but slowly China is catching up. And then 3 countries are regarded as major powers based on their total scores. This is Japan and India. Sorry, only 2 countries achieved the scores of major powers. Only Japan and India. So not 3 countries. Japan has a total cumulative score of 42.5 in 2019, and it's gone down to 38.7 in 2021. While India achieved a total score of 41 in 2019, and it's gone down to about 37.7 in 2021. So 2 superpowers, United States and China, with total cumulative power that are in all 8 spectrums, way above every other country, and 2 major powers, namely Japan and India. And the middle powers, Russia, has a score of about 30, South Korea also has a score about 30. So the score between 10 and 39 are middle powers. And within the ASEAN countries, there are also a number of middle powers. And many of you will probably be surprised. Indonesia only ranks 11, while Singapore is, South Korea is ranked at number 6. Australia ranks at number 7. Then Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, and Indonesia, and then also the Philippines and so on. Because, as I said, this is based on cumulative powers, and Indonesia is not doing too well, despite scoring quite high in diplomatic influence, for example, or future resources. But in terms of current military capabilities, economic resources, and so on, it's actually slightly behind the three ASEAN neighbors: Singapore, Malaysia, and Thailand. And then all the others are minor powers like Bangladesh, Brunei, Myanmar, Cambodia, and so on, because they have a total score of less than 10. Now, next, please, next slide. So based on if you're looking at this objective ranking of power capabilities, there's a discussion, what kind of international order are we developing? At the moment, in fact, there is no consensus yet. This international order is still very much in transition. Many talks about we are entering a period of a new multipolarity, like the period in before the First and Second World War, where there are so many state actors now. The first is the United States as the incumbent superpower, the incumbent hegemonic power, but its power is seen to be in relative decline. If you look at the absolute number, it is not in absolute decline, it is in relative decline, because at the same time, China is on the rise. And China, as we have seen, is the only one country that has a comprehensive range of power. It is truly capable of challenging the United States in all fronts, with its economics, finance, military, and technology. And this the Soviet Union did not have. The Soviet Union was able to challenge the United States in terms of military power, in terms of technology also, but it was never an economic superpower. It was never a financial superpower, unlike China now, which is also a superpower in terms of financial and economic capability. But at the same time, there are now other global and regional powers. Within the region, we have, within the Indo-Pacific region, Japan and India as the two major powers. Russia, which is also part of both the European theater and the Indo-Pacific theater, but there's also Brazil. But at the same time, regional organizations also become increasingly important during the Cold War period and so on. So the role of regional organizations were not really as significant yet in terms of being global players, because the dominance of the primary actors were really the one that shaped the international system. But now there are other, there are so many players, global, regional players, the states and their regional organizations, and so on. So global powers now is much more dispersed, although economic and military capabilities are not really spread equally among the key actors. Some are still more equal than others. So are we in a new multipolarity? Some would argue that the international order is not really multipolar, because in the same way that it was in the pre-war Europe, because of this, it's a greater complexity of international actors. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah. Now, Amitav Acharya argued that the end of the liberal hegemonic order, the US-led hegemonic order, is not being replaced by multipolarity, but rather by a multiplex world order, precisely of the greater complexities of the actors and issues. There are now plurality of international actors. There are states of different sizes. There are international organizations, there are regional organizations, But equally important, states are not the only determinant of, or states or intergovernmental organizations are not the only determinant, that the one that shape the international system, because we have seen the role of non-state actors, particularly, in the early 2000s until recently, regional, terrorist organizations, in fact, were the one that really shook our world and also shaped how the international system evolved for quite a while. So if we remember, the Pax Americana was not challenged by countries, by state actors in the early 2000s, but rather by terrorist organizations, by Al-Qaeda. The conflict was not symmetrical conflicts between state actors, but more asymmetrical conflict between state actors and non-state actors, and not just organizations, but also individuals. Even lone wolves, terrorists could determine how states have to respond. And in fact, there's greater cooperation between states because of this common challenge of non-state threats like terrorism and so on. And issues also become much more plural. The issues are not just about national securities anymore, and not just about defense and security in the military terms. We talk not just about traditional security issues, but also about non-traditional security issues. The world has been brought to its knees several times, first by the 9/11 attack, and then the worldwide conflicts against terrorists, which were organized at the transnational levels, challenging state security as well as the international system. But the world has also been brought to its knees because of the financial crisis. Remember, in 2008, the crash in Wall Street, which also had a global impact. And now, since 2020, the world has come to a standstill because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So the issues have become so plural. Now there's also the issues of climate change, the environmental challenges. Climate change has become a real global issue that we all have to pay attention to. The issues of the threats, the opportunities and challenges posed by new technologies, for example, which also shape our world. And there's also plurality of values. The world is not all marching towards democracies. We are not all going in one direction, ending history as predicted earlier by Fukuyama, because there are new narratives. The rise of these terrorist networks with ideologies from 7th century Arabia, for example. There's different outlooks, and then they're just the menu is much more mixed now. So Amita talks, more a multiplex world order. This is like going to a multiplex cinemas where there are many different films on show, depending on the genre. You can watch romantic movies, you can watch thrillers, you can watch cowboys and comedies and so on. So the world is much more complex. So it is not really truly multipolar. It's much more multiplex. Next, please. Yeah. But at the same time, we also have, it's a question, is there a challenge for new bipolarity amidst this multipolarity? This is also a question. Historical experiences, as I said, show that multipolarity was often characterized by instability and conflict and shifting balances. But history also showed there's always this challenge of a new country becoming more ambitious, wanting to impose hegemony, and that led to balance and counterbalance. In Europe, Napoleon, then Hitler, and so on. But what about the current international system? I would argue that this is much more confusing. It's colored with uncertainty and instability. The system is still very much in fluid. On the one hand, there is now a return of geopolitics and geoeconomics, with China as rising as an economic powerhouse and a military power at the same time, with an ambition to be a global and regional leader. So it's not just an Indo-Pacific leader, but also a global leader. But at the same time, China still lacks the soft power that make other countries want to emulate it. Some countries admire China's stability, its strong political control, and so on, but others are turned off by its one-party state. Still, it's still a communist state and it's an authoritarian state. So not many countries have the Chinese dream, although not many countries have the American dreams anymore either. But the United States and China are now seen as competing first-tier powers. So next slide, please. Yeah. So what we have is a rather unclear and unstable international order. To continue from the previous one, the predominance narrative, particularly in our part of the world, in Indo-Pacific, is about US-China rivalry, which is a signifier on the evolving regional and global order. There are concerns about the Thucydides trap, about this, the Thucydides wrote about the perennial conflict between Athens and Sparta, that the inevitable conflict between an incumbent power and ascendant power, and that seems to drop for the past 10 years in particular, since mid 2016, 2017 up. The world has focused on this range of issues in which the rivalry between China and the United States covered all ranges, not just about maritime issues, but it's also about space, about technology, about trade wars, and so on and so forth. So there are talks about is there going to be a new Cold War, which could again shape our countries, the international system from a more multipolar one to a more bipolar conflict. But as we can see, the US-China rivalry is not the only story. The weakening of the international hegemonic structure, which used to subsume, the international relations among the lesser powers, and now the weakening of that global structure has actually opened ways for, you might call, revisionist countries, for countries that want to change borders, for countries that they are much more ambitious, to carry out aggressive policies toward neighboring countries. So during the Cold War, we saw that relations at the lower level were very much determined also by alliances, and to a certain extent, that also led to much more disciplined relations between the lesser players. But in current situation, there's no international hegemonic power that can really impose global discipline, you might say. And the result is actually more regional tensions and conflicts. We have seen this all the time in the Middle East. Even countries within the Arab League are in conflict with each other. Remember the policy carried out by big neighboring countries, by Saudi Arabia against Qatar, for example. In South Asia, this perennial conflict between India and Pakistan over Kashmir. And now we've seen the Russian invasion, and currently we are in the middle of Russian invasion of Ukraine. So despite the global focus on US-China rivalry, it is not the only story. There are a lot of other stories which are unfolding. So the presence of multi-powers have led to more fluid alliances and partnerships, and cooperation and conflicts take place depending on particular issues. There are no fixed alliances yet, although within the Indo-Pacific, we can see that the rise of China has also led to new alignment to contain China. Now, next slide, please. Now, this is also a question, for your international relations students. When the focus is so much on China and the US, is there going to be a new G2? So, is this again the one that's going to shape global politics, that the US-China rivalry, will it be like the old Soviet Union US rivalry, which could again shape the world into, divide the world into a bipolar structure? Is a new Cold War going to divide US and China? And if it does, it has the potential of undermining multipolarity if other countries are forced to choose sides. Or if there's an agreement, a consensus between them, that also reduce the space for other agency, for the other major powers and middle powers, whether it is contestation or it is consensus. If a G2 world evolves from the current rather complex multiplexity, then we'll have to see, how the world order again will arrange itself. The rules will be written by China and the US. This is very much a question mark. Some say yes, we are entering a new Cold War. Others say no, we are not. So we'll have a look at this in the next slides, please. Next slide. Yeah. Now I like to talk about the, that was the challenges, and now but also there are opportunities in multipolarity and multiplexity. At the moment, we have several engines of growth. We have countries, besides the superpowers and the major powers, but also there are regional organizations and so on, and various initiatives. You have for example, from the China, there's BRI and AIB, but it's also the choices provided by Japan, the choices provided by European Union, within the regional stage level within ASEAN. Also, there's so many more engines of growth now that provide choices, which provide opportunities for countries to both compete and cooperate. And in this era, of course, it gives more space for regional organizations. As mentioned earlier, state actors are not the only ones that shape the rules. Regional organizations in particular region, particularly in Europe, it is the EU, within Southeast Asia, ASEAN, in Latin America, you have Mercosur and so on, and also in Africa and so on, and to a certain extent also in the Middle East. Regional organizations have more space because there's a need for coalition building between powers, particularly small and middle powers. And in this moment, I would say that there's more opportunities for middle powers. So this is, many people right now about this is the current fluidity provides opportunities for lesser powers, particularly middle powers, to play a more significant role in helping to inform the international system, particularly within a regional context. So I might call this, the middle power moment. Next, please. Yeah. The opportunities, for all of us now, that despite the various threats, the instability and so on, because of this complexity, there is also opportunities to avoid this direct confrontation or a new Cold War, because the conflicts now is not dominated by ideological tensions or by absolutist adherence to particular ideology, which really leaves very little room, for compromises, because either you are a communist or you're not a communist. Either you are a capitalist or you're not a capitalist. At the moment, that kind of ideological divisions are no longer relevant, because issues that are of a variety, functional issues, such as economic issues, environmental issues, and technology issues, for example, provide better opportunities both cooperation as well as, of course, challenges and competition. So there are a system which provides both opportunities for both cooperation and competition, because it is not ideological in nature. And within this system, the middle powers can enhance their leverage and maximize opportunities through various forums. They can do bilateral relations, they can develop minilateral arrangements, they can also be active in regional initiatives and so on. There also the need to ensure peace and stability through confidence building measures and to prevent conflicts. So there are serious attempts to mitigate the various threats and to maximize opportunities, precisely because it is still very much in flux. And this is among others because countries are now much more focused on economic issues. We are still in the middle of crisis and so on, and the need to develop functional linkages. And there are also plurality of processes, not just government to governments, but also the involvement of non-state actors. So the track 2, track 1.5, business, and so on and so forth. So this multipolarity or multiplexity, provides arenas in which we can also develop cooperation. Next, please. Next slide. So here I come to the issues of middle power. So why is it important? So I've written in a more detail here. So there is no consensus on the definition of middle power. There's a lot is being written lately. The current world is considered to be the third wave of middle powers. The first wave was after the ending of the Second World War, where the traditional middle powers emerging. Canada and Australia have been cited as the early examples of middle powers. And then in the 1950s and 60s, also new middle powers emerging. Indonesia is counted as already a middle power by its behavior in the 1950s and early 60s. It was very active internationally, hosted the Asian African Conference, founder of the non-aligned movement, and so on. So there's the second wave of middle power. And then the current third wave in the 21st centuries, when there are more countries developing their economies, countries that have become much more stable politically, the national boundaries are becoming much more fixed, and more countries have developed economic capacity, military capacity, and so on. And there are just more of them out there. And so that's why also this is called the middle power moment. And generally middle powers are countries that do not simply, fall into this binary relations of leadership on followers. So if one studies international relations, a lot of the focus in international relations was focused on the big powers, the rule makers, and while the other countries tend to be, they are followers. But in the studies of middle power, this is not as clean cut, because middle powers do not simply, follow into this divisions of followers or, of being rule taker. The big powers shape the rules, and then other countries would simply follow. That is not the case. Middle powers have much more room to maneuver. The middle powers do not claim agency by challenging the global power structure. It doesn't go around saying, we do not want a particular system and then challenging directly and providing alternatives, but rather by building coalition over an issue and putting commitment, to preserve the rule-based international order. So this is, one of the significant role for middle power, that it tends to be status quo oriented and wants to preserve the rule-based international order. It doesn't want instability. It doesn't want Darwinian rules where the strong, will do what they like, and the weak must suffer what they must. That the middle powers do not necessarily accept that. So middle powers are seen to be non-threatening, and they hold intermediary role in providing forum and network for a certain issue. So in other words, middle power has a free and active problem-solving foreign policy. This is a summary of what can a middle power do. Now, it is not necessary for a country to identify itself as a middle power, although there's arguments about that. Some literature said, you have to identify yourself as a middle power. But I would argue that it's not necessary for a country to identify itself as a middle power, because the characteristics of middle powers can be indicated through a country's behavior, including through the promotion of multilateralism and diplomacy instead of unilateral action, as well as having the political goodwill to seek constructive solutions to global governance challenges. So based on such characteristics, a number of countries have been categorized as middle power to varying extents, such as Canada, Australia, Mexico, South Korea, Turkey, and Indonesia. I'm mentioning countries that are all in G20. And middle power is highly relevant today because of its potential to restore or at least defend the rule-based order. So with the strategic turbulence happening recently, there's an absence of a credible superpower hegemon to support multilateralism, because not all countries want to follow the United States, not all countries want to follow China, and the contestations and the conflicts at the first tier level, as well as the second tier level, leads to a sense of a vacuum, of real credible international leadership, and this is a space in which middle powers can also fill. So potentially, middle powers can bridge this gap by exercising its potential leadership through existing forums and layered diplomacy to conduct inclusive discussions on contentious issues. So middle powers, their role is always very good at trying to find common ground. Next, please. So that's the expectations of what middle power can do. So just very briefly, what are the attributes? Middle powers have materials attribute clearly. The in hierarchical ranking, it is between the major and the small powers. It doesn't have the capacity to shape the world, but it is sufficient. It has sufficient capacity, to play an influential role. But the most important thing, as mentioned earlier, is in the behavior and function. Middle powers, because it has limited capacity, there's a tendency for niche diplomacy. It focuses on certain issues. Certain middle powers, for example, is very good at peace building, at mediating conflicts and so on. Other middle powers focus on issues of climate, takes leadership on that. So there is niche diplomacy. At the same time, there is also an expectation of behavior that middle powers, because it wants to preserve world peace, wants to preserve rule-based order, it doesn't like to see conflict. It likes also to try to find, a consensus. It tends to act as facilitator, as mediator, bridge builder, and so on. And as I said, middle powers don't need to identify itself middle powers, but other countries do need to identify itself. When a certain country is middle power, usually the recognition comes from other, not from yourself. And the most important thing is that middle power has this ability for upward and downward management. Middle powers can go up, dealing with great, with superpowers and major powers, because it has the capacity to act as a bridge. But it also has the capacity to communicate with smaller powers, so downward management, as well as sideways lateral management, as coalition among middle powers. So this is in most of the classical literature about middle powers. But lately, there are also a lot of new literature about middle powers that challenge these classical definitions. I will not talk too much about it here, but it argues that that is Western bias. Not all middle powers are good international citizens or support multilateralism or rules-based international orders. There are also spoilers, toxic followers, and so on and so forth. I will not have much time to have discussions here, but go out there for you who are interested to see that there are more debates about middle powers. So middle powers are not just countries that are behaving nicely. As I would argue, North Korea in terms of material rank, is a middle power, and it shapes, its region. It's a rogue state. So say, that, but it is also a middle power. But most of the literature would argue that you have to behave in a certain manner to be recognized as a middle power. Not many countries would say that North Korea is a middle power. Next, please. Next, yeah. Now, there's also discussions about types of middle powers. Now, there is Alexander Wen wrote about social theory of international relations. There is, in most international relations literature, the tendency of the writers, the majority of writings about international relations tends to be by people with realist persuasion. So about competition among nations, about the issues of national security predominates. The issues is about wars and peace and military relations, military conflicts, and so on and so forth. That seems to shape, most of the literature on international relations. But Alexander Wen wrote about social theory of international relations and says that, states, like people, are socialized by their environment and by their worldview, and that also influences how they behave internationally. And this theory is adopted by Swilander, who wrote about middle powers. And there's this three typologies. Countries, in fact, share these typologies. This is not clean types, but this is the typologies is, first is Hobbesian view. So there are certain countries that tends to look at the outside world in a more they sees the outside world as more hostile. The environment tends to be threatening. This seems to be the more realist perspective. So, that politics among countries, they're always competition and conflict. And therefore, the focus is always on high security, on high politics, on national security, on military issues, and so on. And Swillen argued that some countries, some middle powers could be considered to be Hobbesian. But there's also another worldview, so it's about Locke, that looks at the world in a more positive manner, much more optimistic, that the world it's threatening, but also times, it also provides opportunities. So there are threats, there are opportunities. So the tendency is to have a mixed priorities of both high and low politics. And here, institutions becomes important to regulate behavior and so on. This is focus on studies about regional organizations, about international organizations, and so forth. And then the third worldview is about Kantian. This is much more positive. Kantian talks about democratic peace, that countries that are democracies, if there's certain values, they do not have conflicts with each other. And the world is less threatening. And without ignoring high politics, the focus is mostly on low politics, functional cooperation, and so on. And typically, countries that have a more Kantian worldview is much more open to the typical middle power behavior of mediating, bridge building, facilitating, and so on. While those who have a tendency towards a more Hobbesian worldview will be less amenable to this classical middle power role. Now, Emmas and Theo, however, posited another types of middle powers based on whether they have capacity, material capacity, financial, technological, political, military, and so on, and whether their strategic environment is considered to be threatening or less threatening. Now, those that have higher military, capacity, material capacity, while the external environment is considered to be more threatening, tends to be much more functional, a more functional middle power because it's more issue focused. Now, South Korea, which is located in a highly challenging environment where the threat of North Korea is there, but at the same time, it has a lot of material capability, is regarded as a more functional middle power. It can focus on particular issues and try to solve it. Now, while countries which has a slightly more benign environment, which doesn't see the outside environment as fully threatening, but at the same time, it has less material capability, has a tendency to focus more on ideas, on norms and values, about the need to resolve conflicts with peaceful means, developing norms of cooperation, and so on. And this is called a more normative middle power. Now, countries that have both mixed, higher level of threat and higher military capability, but also higher material capability, can also have much more mixed approaches. So this is also, again, very clean type factual and normative. Some countries are more successful than others. So these are types of middle powers that you can have a greater look later on. Next, please. Now here I would like to focus a little more, to give it a bit of context. Look at the example of Indonesia as a middle power. Now, a lot of studies have been written about Indonesia as a middle power, which adhere more to a more classical definition of middle powers, relating to function and behavior. So not the more challenging new definitions that not all middle powers behave in a classical way of supporting rules-based, be a good international citizen, be a bridge builder, and so on. A lot of studies have looked at Indonesia as an emerging power, as well as a functioning middle power. It has been seen as a constructive force in world politics. Indonesia, as you know, has taken lead in regional organizations. And in fact, although we now focus a lot on Indonesia's role in the region, we have seen that, in fact, from the 1950s, Indonesia took a lead in bringing Asian and African countries together to the first Bandung Conference, the first Asian African Conference, which led to the Bandung principles of peaceful coexistence. So from the beginning, Indonesia has played this role of trying also to represent itself as a spokesperson for developing and emerging countries in global forums. Its role tends to be much more mediation oriented and tended to be much more modest, to propose modest reform. So in line with the promotion of multilateralism, rule-based international order, a more inclusive collaboration on various issues. So it has always tried to, if there are competitions, Indonesia's tendency has always tried to find this middle ground. So I've argued in some of my writings that Indonesia could be regarded as, a Kantian middle power. Though many say, there's still a lot of conflicts in Indonesia, our democracy is still very much under construction. We really cannot talk about democratic peace yet, but Indonesia could be, it's not a Hobbesian middle power, and it's not really too oriented towards legalistic institutions, but rather towards, a more normative middle power. So both a Kantian and as well as a normative middle power. Indonesia is much more successful in developing norms and values rather than trying to solve particular issues. I only have about 8 minutes left, so I have to go quickly. It's nearly finished. Yeah, next slides, please. Now, again, giving context to focus as middle power. Indonesia's role as a middle power has mostly focused in the region, I mean, mostly through ASEAN. And we've seen that Indonesia, as the largest member of ASEAN, has taken the lead in promoting various norms and values within the region. While ASEAN has always worked based on consensus and so on, but it is recognized that usually taken that Indonesia is a natural leader in ASEAN, and as I said, is mostly seen as a normative middle power because a lot of these ASEAN norms and values and ASEAN ways have originated from Indonesia. So Indonesia has been considered to be quite successful in this. And the search to try to find equilibrium, to try to prevent dominations. There's always been a perennial concern of middle powers. Middle powers do not want hegemonic countries to control the regional and international order, which would give very little space for middle power. So hegemonic denial has been always a preoccupation of middle power, and within the region, Indonesia has mostly worked with and through ASEAN, as we know, like the ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific, the promotion of open and inclusive regionalism, the promotion of more positive sum game in international relations, the promotion of ASEAN centrality. So ASEAN as a regional power, as a middle power regional organizations, has been the focus of Indonesia's middle power diplomacy. This is the next slide. Yeah, but Indonesia's middle power diplomacy is not only within the region, as we know that Indonesia is also a member of the G20, and within the G20, you can see that the position of middle powers is also being leveraged there. I mentioned earlier that one of Indonesia's middle power role in the global stage has always been to speak on behalf of developing countries. And Indonesia has tended to position itself within multilateral forums, including within the G20, as bridging the interests between the developed and developing countries, because there are many, many issues, including the issues which are now going to be discussed in the Indonesian presidency of G20, like the issues of global public health architecture, the issues of technology, the issues of energy transition, and so on. The interests of developed countries and developing countries are not always aligned, and Indonesia has tended, to adopt this middle power role of promoting the interests of developing countries. Now, within the G20 itself, you can see that there's a tendency to be there are two blocks which often have competing interests. There's the G7 countries of United States and European countries and Japan on the one hand, and there's the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And here, the middle powers within the G20 has also developed its own coalitions. Mexico, Indonesia, South Korea, Turkey, and Australia have developed this MICTA. Now, within the G20 again, within the Indo-Pacific context, there also the need to define a middle ground between the Quad member countries, between United States, Japan, India, and Australia, which are now in conflictual relationships against China. That's also a challenge for Indonesia's middle power role within G20. And of course, the current real challenges to ensure that the Russian invasion of Ukraine does not completely derail the G20 activities, and particularly the summit. And this is clearly, a real challenge for Indonesia as a middle power that opposes the invasions on the one hand, but also opposes the resulting global conflict with sanctions, which could also only, increase the tension. And there's a desire to try to find a middle ground. And, how can the middle power, whether within the G20 or within the ASEAN and in other forum, can try to ease the tension and so on. Now, finally, I think I'm in good time. This is my final slide. So the international order at the moment is still very much in transition. There's great complexity, which poses both challenges and opportunities. We see great power rivalry, we see emerging multipolarity or multiplexity. And at the same time, we see greater roles for middle powers with their varying attributes and types. And we can say that, this can be a middle power moment if middle powers are willing to exercise these opportunities by helping to ease tension to influence norms, to shape values and institutions, and also to maximize benefits, because conflicts and tensions also provide opportunities, as long as it doesn't become open military conflicts, which, of course, would make life very difficult for other powers. But within these uncertainties, there's also opportunities to benefits, and how to maximize benefits and mitigate the risk posed by the superpowers and major powers. Jonathan Ping talks about hybridization policy, of mixed policies or plurality of policies. And the most important thing is that middle powers can seize these moments by continuing to work together with each other, and also carrying coalition building about middle powers in order to manage these relations upward with the superpowers and major powers, as well as ensuring also the rights of that small countries which do not really have a voice in international relations could also find conduits in the middle powers to help protect and promote their interests as well. So I think, thank you very much. I've taken nearly 1 hour here. So I'm open to discussions. Thank you.
Okay, so that's exactly 1 hour, Dewi, that you're actually on the mark. As for this, we will continue with the question and answer session. So our first questions will be open to the participants in the Zoom meeting. So if you have any questions, then you can just raise your hand, and then the committee will allow you to speak. That is, please raise your hand. If you're on YouTube, then please write your please write your questions in the YouTube chat box, because the committee will forward them here. Okay, so we have one hand up, two actually. So I'm going to ask, yes, Abdullah Amir Pramudia. You can unmute yourself.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity given, Mr. Dama, and good morning to Prof. Dewi. Thank you. Hope you are in good health, everyone. And first of all, I would like to appreciate your wonderful insight in international relations, especially in multipolarity in the middle of the uncertainty. I would like to ask your opinion about what kind of advice you can give to the Indonesian government. You can give to Indonesian government. You can give the Indonesian government regarding to face this uncertainty in the international order, quote unquote. Thank you very much. I'm Abdul from Jakarta.
Well, thank you very much. That's always a $6 million question. For all countries, the middle powers countries and smaller countries and so on. First, the most important thing is that that we ensure our security by not getting trapped into conflicts not of our own making. So do not get involved in conflicts, particularly military conflicts, which could destroy us. That's always been the preoccupation of all countries in international relations. How do we ensure that? And secondly, of course, how to benefit from our global system, because no countries can really live on their own. Now here, Indonesia, I think, has been very wise, and its diplomacy from the very beginning has been based on this free and active foreign policy. So the international environment has always been very challenging. Now is even more challenging than others. But if you remember, before that, there's I mentioned at the end of World War II, this new bipolar structure, superpowers determining, pulling one country against the other. The choice has been to develop first a free and active foreign policy so that Indonesia does not enter into alliances with other countries. And secondly, to develop this coalition among like-minded countries. And Indonesia has always been very good at this, and then to play, to continue to play an active role whether through regional organizations or whether it's through the UN. So I would say that, Indonesia seems to be doing well. A bit of crisis is actually necessary for middle powers to be able to play a role. Because, as I say, if it is hegemonic peace, if only one country determining this international system, it acts unilaterally, and that provides very little protection for other countries. If it's two countries, a G2, determining it also gives little space. If they're in conflict, we got trapped, like they say, when elephants have fight, the grass gets trampled. But when elephants make love, grass also gets trampled. So that provides an opportunity. So this opportunity, this fluidity in the international system actually provides, as I said, bigger powers with more leverage. But you need to be able to play it very carefully. And this is, meniti buih, as in Indonesian would say. So make sure that we are always wise in choosing the issues and which we can side on and not. And here, I think that, a more functional foreign policy, not just a principled foreign policy, is also very important. So we need to be principled on certain issues. Invasion, violations of international law is unacceptable. And Indonesia should be willing to stand up and say that without fearing that, if we say that, we lose economic interests and so on. But at the same time, also trying to open up avenues where we do not close relations, we do not completely offend relations with other countries as well. So what Indonesia is doing and what ASEAN is doing in international relations is called hedging, probably, maximizing benefits, mitigating risk. But for Indonesia, I would say, that, it's not just completely transactional, mitigating risk and maximizing benefits, but it's also middle power diplomacy also has some principles to it. There is some values that we always need to continue to promote. That is that, the issues of resolutions of conflicts through peaceful means, avoiding the use of military force, and trying to provide facilities for mediation, bridge building, and so on whenever possible. So what Indonesia is doing at the moment, I think is already fine. Within the G20, what happens on the Russian issue, it is not an easy issue, and it's created controversy, for example. But I think that Indonesia has tried to skirt that middle ground quite wisely.
Right. Thank you for your for the answer, Dewi. We have more hands up here, and I haven't gotten anything from the YouTube. Now I'd like to perhaps have a question from Thailand there, from Nat Chapat. Sorry if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly. Okay, so
yes,
feel free to speak. Yes.
Yes, you pronounce my name correctly. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for our very interesting lecture. It's been very structured with clear example. But I would like to hear from you about your opinion according to the enforcement of international law and international organization in the multiplex world order. If the structure of law and order we are using now can be used in this multiplex world order, is there any way to reform or reorganize international organization like UN or G20? This is my question.
Yeah, it is very important. This is in fact the difference, between multipolarity in the earlier world, when there's no international organizations that no agreed international laws, that you can see the anarchy. International system is considered to be anarchical. There's no law that bounds states' behaviors. States can behave in a very circumspect manner internally, because they have institutions, they have laws that govern rights and wrong. They have institutions that have legitimate, use of force. Only the military and the police, for example, and there are laws and punishments, but not in international system. We don't have that. And of course, that was after the experience of the First World War. There was this attempt to develop that kind of international law and institution through the League of Nations, which of course failed to prevent the Second World War, and that led to the establishment of a UN system and the UN Charter, which is very clear, that respects for sovereignty, respects for territorial integrity, and about the law governing the deployment of international force and so on. It's very, very clear. But at the same time, laws do not exist in a vacuum. We also have a system of politics. So who will shape the laws and who will exercise the laws? And in fact, we have a very unequal international system. We have the P5, which are in competition with each other. At one hand, this is good because they can constrain one another and provide greater justice. In a democracy, we have to have checks and balances, right? So it's good that we have checks and balances also at the international system.
Okay, it seems we've lost Professor Dewi there. Maybe we could wait for a couple of minutes until she reconnects.
In the best interest of the international system, to exercise the international law. But as a matter of fact, that is not the case. Politics predetermine, and this is the challenge of the international law. There is a perception that the international law is only shaped by the powerful and exercised mostly in the interest also of the powerful. And this is a problem that when there is a perception, for example, that for a long time the international system has been determined by the US-led international liberal order, and if the US were to violate international laws, for example, or friends of the US were to violate international laws, there's less of an international reactions of it. But countries that are considered hostile, for example, they would suffer more, whether it's from military sanctions, from economic sanctions, and so on. And I think this is a problem also in the international law. But we need that international law. We need that certainty. But the desire to reform the United Nations to make it more equitable is, of course, being held hostage to the veto power of the P5. The P5 disagree on a lot of issues, particularly if on issues that are of direct interest to them. For example, P5 cannot take votes on they cannot make decisions on the Russian invasions because Russia is a member of the P5. But they will agree on retaining their privileges, and this is a problem for international law. And there is also, as I say, the means of enforcement international laws tends to be only effective if it involves smaller countries. But if the players involved in violations are the powerful countries, international law tends to be less effective here. So I think that's my long-winded question. So there is a real need to reform the UN system, the real need to reform the decision-making process. But in order to that, we go round and round. Who would put the bell on the cat? How do we go around the veto power of the P5 country in order to reform the international system to make it more equitable? And it will take, probably it will never really happen. But at least we have the international law at least, the international committee can say, you have violated, certain principles of the charter.
All right. Thank you for the answer, Professor Dewi. We will go to the YouTube chat because there are some questions there. There's a question from Singapore, if I'm not mistaken. Could the committee pull up the question? Okay, so Ryan from Singapore asks, given Singapore's small size, what do you think are the consequences of Singapore imposing sanctions in Russia over its invasion? So Professor Dewi, it's that's up for grabs.
Yeah, that's depends. I do not really know the trade links or investment link between Singapore and Russia. So I do not know to an extent, that would really have an impact. But probably, if there are certain commercial links and other links, it could be affected. And I think that, that probably that's why Indonesia was not willing to go into that, because it has some very close trade deals with Russia at the moment. I know that this Indonesia has received both understanding and criticism here, because Indonesia is very interested in attracting investment from Russia towards some of its infrastructure projects. Russia is also an important market for Indonesia's palm oil exports, for example. So there's been an unwillingness to join the bandwagon of sanctioning Russia, and we see that this also happens to India. If one looks at it, India has also abstained, while Indonesia did not abstain. Indonesia supported the General Assembly resolutions, but India has abstained. But Singapore, because of I understand that Singapore is a small country surrounded by big neighbors. In the past, it has been vulnerable against confrontasi from Indonesia, and also its difficult relations with Malaysia. Singapore needs to stand. It's very clear that Singapore wants to stand up and made it very clear that any international violations of the law, any infringements on territorial sovereignty, state sovereignty of a country by a big neighbor would be totally unacceptable. So I think one would be very surprised if Singapore did not have a very clear stance. But I imagine its relations with Western countries, economic links with Western countries, are probably much more important for Singapore than Russia at the moment. But if there is a cost, probably Singapore feels that the cost of not standing up clearly would be greater.
Right. So it seems that at the end of the day, it comes back to interests. Going back to the Zoom meeting, there's still a lot of hands up. I would like to call upon someone from Malaysia there. Sufi, you can please unmute yourself and then ask your question.
Hello everyone, can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, good morning, selamat pagi, Prof. Dewi. Very fascinating for me, sort of like an introduction or a revision of revisiting middle power discourse. I have two questions. The first one and the second is a follow-up on middle powers and foreign policy, which is in your expertise. So my first question, is middle power a natural progression for states, sort of like a natural progression to going to a quote-unquote a higher power range? So for example, do Indonesia or Singapore going towards as a natural progression for a state, to a major power, who knows, it could be a superpower 100 years down the line, who knows. And the follow-up to that, drawing from foreign policy, do middle powers and foreign policy, is there a foreign policy for middle power for countries to either change or shift themselves to accommodate a foreign policy towards middle power? Like, for example, maybe maybe you could derive from Indonesia. How does Indonesia went from, a country 60 years ago that is struggling with its own internal conflict to now become, a part of G20, something that also Malaysia hasn't done, or, in that sense, how do countries through foreign policies strive towards a middle power leadership? So that's my two questions. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, I suppose all countries want to be superpowers and major powers in terms of accumulating material capabilities. And some countries do change. For example, India is a major power and sees itself as behaving major power, and not as a middle power, particularly in relations to its smaller neighbors, including even within regional organizations. Yeah, one of the argument why SHARC, why the South Asian Regional Cooperation has not been as successful as ASEAN, is precisely because the behavior of the largest member, has been less nurturing. Now, is it a natural progression? I don't think it's natural. It's a choice. Yeah, in terms of material accumulation, that's something that could be natural. But I'm of the school of persuasion that I do believe that middle powership is more behavior. It's not just about material possessions. So if one looks at the Lowy Power Index, all of the countries that are under major powers, and they're only India and Japan, they're mostly middle powers, except for the small powers, the one with score less than 10. So in terms of hierarchical ranks, there are a lot of middle powers. But in literature studies, and studies about middle powers, only certain countries are given the attributes of middle power, and that's related to function and behavior. Now, there's an interesting study by Cameron and Peace about Indonesia as a middle power. And it argued that Indonesia did not play a middle power role under Sukarno, because confronting Malaysia and Singapore is not a middle power behavior. And under Habibie and Abdul Rahman Wahid, also Indonesia did not display middle power attribute because it was too much preoccupied with internal problems. So it did not really play a very active role, on the regional or global stage at the time. So it argued that Indonesia is a middle power under Megawati, under Yudhoyono, and under Jokowi. Now, from this perspective, it means that it's behavior rather than material possessions. Yeah. So although, as I said, there are studies which challenge this so-called classical attributes of middle power, classical behavior of middle power, that you have to be pro status quo, not wanting to rock the boats, always in favor of multilateralism, because that's where you can safety in number, but also make sure that because it's multilateralism ensures more rules-based, while unilateralism or more bilateralism is when unequal relations would give less room for middle power. In ASEAN countries, China bilateral level, that's not equal, but through multilateral forums, through ASEAN regional, then through other global forums, middle powers have greater room to maneuver. So how would Indonesia behave, for example, if it becomes a major power? Will it flex its neighbors again and terrorize Singapore and Malaysia again? I don't think so. So behaviors can be shaped. So I think that because of the desire to keep the peace and stability, and luckily we have rational leaders all the time, and there's realizations that peace and stability is very important for our region, for our prosperity, for our common survival. Indonesia, even if were to accumulate sufficient power to become a major power, hopefully it will only flex its muscle in a wider forum, global forum. At the regional forum, hopefully the middle power inclination, the desire to convene, to mediate, to facilitate will continue to be predominant. Although, according to realists, that doesn't make sense. No, realists say if you have power, flex it. But we have seen that socializations have changed behavior. Looks what happened to Germany and France and the UK. UK has gone out of the EU, but Germany and France, in particular, that's really behavioral change has happened. So read Alexander Wen's, social theory of international relations. The behaviors, including states' behavior, can be changed. And I think that I've answered both your first and second questions. Yeah.
Hey, so thanks, Professor Dewi, for that answer. We're going to go back to our YouTube, to the YouTube questions, because there's another question there. Could the committee please show it on the screen? Thank you. So there is a question from Maria, who hails from Timor-Leste. Prof. Dewi, which is most stable, a unipolar, bipolar, or a multipolar world order? So, Prof. Dewi, you have, it's back to you.
Well, it depends where you sit in the global system, I suppose. For if you are a superpower, if you are the United States after the end of the Cold War, the unipolar world was clearly a realization of its long-term dream. It would be unchallenged, but in reality, and there's less. There was expectation at the time that it would be global peace. We all talk about peace dividends. Countries do not need to devote their resources to military procurements, to defense and security anymore, because it will be peace in the world. This one liberal hegemonic order, and everybody will all be democratic, free market economy, and so on and so on. But even during this time, as you can see, that this abuse of power by the sole superpower, unilateral actions, and so on, while other states could not challenge this. What happened was, the challenge came from non-state actors. The rise of, global terrorism, it led to asymmetric warfare, and so on. So the war could not really survive either, in that unipolar order, in peace instabilities, because there were other actors that came to play. So that was not very stable either. A lot of Muslim countries at the time saw that there's a new war on terror. It's the West versus Islamic world, and so on. So that also led to a lot of instability and the rise of ISIS and so on. Bipolar structure, people would argue that the Cold War was stable. There's no major conflicts between the primary actors because of the nuclear deterrence and the risk of mutual annihilation, mutually assured destruction, by the possessions of nuclear weapons. There's more hegemonic, bipolar hegemonic stability at the global level, at the level of the primary actors. But if you look at what happened with the rest of the world, there are proxy wars everywhere. The Vietnam War, the Cambodian conflicts, and the conflicts in the Middle East, conflicts everywhere. So competition was played out in a hot war by the two superpowers, which destroyed a lot of countries. Whether it's just ideological conflicts within the countries, or real life wars where American troops fought in Vietnam, for example, the Korean War between Chinese troops and American troops. So there's no real stability either, although at the global level, there's more certainty, there is more expectation of behavior. If the West behaved this way, the Eastern Bloc would behave another way. We saw a lot of spy movies and so on. There's expectations of certain types of behaviors, and in a way that provided certainty. But for the rest of the world, it's not very stable either. Now, multipolar world order, we have seen a lot of wars in Europe all the time, endless wars between different powers in Europe. And now we have this new multiplexity and multipolarity. Is that expectation, is it going to be unstable again? It's going to be unstable. And there's always risk of, war. We thought that a war could not really happen. Despite the Russian threat against Ukraine, we thought that the war would not really happen, but it happened again. And there's always concerns that various flashpoints could lead to conflicts. But there is more, I would argue, more opportunity also for maintaining some peace and stabilities because of the plurality of actors and also the plurality of issues. So there are a lot of areas of conflict, but for example, the US and China disagree about a lot of things, including about vaccines and so on. But the reality is that the WHO needs to work together. We need to work together to provide vaccines. The US and China may have a lot of conflicts about trade and commercial, but the largest bondholders in Wall Street is China. When there was a Wall Street crisis, it was China who criticized the US, for not managing its portfolio very well, because China is the one that lost a lot of money. And for the United States, China is a very important trade partner. For China, the United States is a very important trade partner. And for all the other countries, they all are major players there. So I would say that I'm very much more in favor of ensuring multipolarity and multiplexity in particular, not just multipolarity, because multiplexity, gives more rooms, not just for the first tier and second tier powers, but also for the middle powers and for regional organizations. So I would argue that it's a lot of uncertainty, but provides precisely because of this uncertainty, it also gives a lot of space for more creative diplomacy and gives room for middle powers as state actors as well as middle powers in regional organizations.
All right, thank you for the answer, Professor Dewi. We will now go back to our Zoom session and see. Again, there's still 4 hands up. Perhaps Hendra, who has been raising his hand for quite a long time there. So Hendra, you have your mic.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, moderator. Thank you, Mr. Agus. So thank you for the comprehensive presentations, Professor Dewi. Well, we know that at the present also that the process of negotiations between Ukraine and also Russia is still going on. But as we know that still there is no exact agreement involved both sides. But as we know that this is regarding to the current situations, as we know that this is noticeably that regarding to the sanction that has already given by the Western to Russia, and also that even small country like Singapore also has already given the sanctions, while regarding to the financial sanctions, of course, economic sanctions. So while we know that Indonesia also challenged the conditions when Indonesia for more than 40 years, 50 years trapped in the FPDA, 5-power defense agreement, and Australia want to reborn again in 2017, and AUKUS and fought. Well, to some extent that I'm not agree with your point of view regarding to the Indonesia only middle power. I think there is also opportunity for Indonesia to become a global major power, one of the global major power in the regions, as we know that this kind of the rivalry between the US and also China will tend to prolong, to continue for how many years we still do not know, but the impact itself has already been regarding to the energy crisis, and maybe later on along with the energy crisis also food crisis. So I would like to ask your perspective on that regarding to the Indonesia also fail when Indonesia also became co-sponsor in the UN General Assembly resolution, as we know that this is also interesting. While other countries in the regions such India and Pakistan prefer not to say yes to the resolutions in condemning the Russian special military operations to Ukraine. Thank you very much, Mr. Agas and also Professor Dewi. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a different view.
Okay.
I have a different view because for me, foreign policy is not just about interests, but it's also about values. Yeah, we stand for something, and here I like to go on record. I strongly condemn Russian invasion of Ukraine. I strongly condemn the violations of the UN Charter, and I do believe that on certain issues, you need to be willing to stand up for your principles, even if you feel that it might cost you economically. So for Indonesia, I think it has taken a middle ground here because it stands on principle on this, though it has softened, by its stance by not joining the sanctions. But I applaud Indonesia for joining the resolutions condemning Russia, because we do not approve the invasion of one country against another. Secondly, Indonesia has the potential of being a major power, even a global power later on. There, McKinsey says by 2045, Indonesia will be a major power, and so on. And certainly we are working towards that. In terms of material capacity, in terms of behavior, major power also has a lot of responsibility. Major power will need also to be a good international citizen by supporting public goods, by providing more aid for developing countries, by even contributing more for the international peacekeeping force and so on. Indonesia, I think, will continue to pay that, in a greater capacity. But when we talk about middle power diplomacy, there is a certain behavior that tries to be much more conciliatory. So it's less the use of material capacity, but also more the use of certain behavior of shaping norms and values, of trying to resolve issues and so on. Indonesia, I think, will continue to straddle that. There will, when opportunities arise, when it has more capacity, even without material capacity, Indonesia had gone global. If you look at what Indonesia did in unilaterally declaring Wawasan Nusantara, Indonesia's archipelagic states, when the international law at the time was not really friendly towards the rights of archipelagic nations. Indonesia went ahead with the Juanda Declaration, saying, that the Indonesian waters between the islands are archipelagic waters, and then push for the adoption of the UN conventions on rule of the sea, UNCLOS. That's middle power behavior, even at a time when Indonesia did not really have the capacity, the material capacity as middle power. So if you look at the Laui Power Index, interestingly, in the diplomacy, Indonesia is regarded as already major power, because the score that Indonesia gained in the diplomacy activities is higher than 50. So it's it's at the level of major power already. But at the material level, other level, Indonesia is middle power. While in science and technology, Indonesia is a small power, because in at the a lot of the capacities, Indonesia only is a small power, because we are not punching the wall. Singapore is a superpower. when it comes to technological advancements and so on and so forth. So you need to be able to calibrate. So for me, Indonesia has taken the correct stance. I know that there's some controversies here. Some are criticized Indonesia for not going far enough in condemning Russia. Some argued Indonesia should not have joined in supporting the resolutions and abstained. My personal feeling, Indonesia has taken the correct position here.
Right. Thank you for the answer, Professor Dewi. We actually have a comment from the we actually have a comment here in which I wonder if Professor Dewi is going to respond to this. The comment comes from Ambassador Akira Chiba, who is representing the Japanese mission to ASEAN. So I'm going to just read the comment here, and Professor Dewi, if you want to provide a short response, then please do. So first of all, he conveys his apologies for not being able to join the Zoom because of technical problems. But his comment is the quote, developing middle ground between Quad countries and China, end quote, might be tempting, but it might also be damaging to ASEAN, as if one side pushes harder, ASEAN will have to constantly shift its position. I argue that ASEAN countries, including Indonesia, should keep a firm stand on the AOIP, and end comment. So Professor, would you like to respond to that? Briefly, perhaps.
Yeah, that's to coming. But AOP is trying to find a middle ground. ASEAN Outlook Indo-Pacific is, as you know, is inclusive. It doesn't want to have to see a zero-sum game between countries, between the United States and allies on the one hand, opposing China and then China also opposing the United States. The ASEAN countries tends to be much more flexible on issues in which we disagree with China. I think the ASEAN will try to solve that problems, but at the same time, it will want to continue to develop good relations with China, and at the same time also develop good relations with all the other partners, including Quad countries. In fact, ASEAN countries have not taken a position on the Quad. It has never put any statement about the Quad. Indonesia, as a country, has made a statement about AUKUS, but not AUKUS per se, but about the nuclear-powered submarines. But it has not really, neither Indonesia nor ASEAN have developed specific comments about alliances which are against or in favor. And ASEAN, I think, will continue to navigate very turbulent waters, and between two rocks. So it's not just the water turbulence; there are a lot of shoals and rocks as well. And it will be much more strategic. It will continue to hedge. Hedging, according to Malaysian scholar Quick. So there are so many components to hedging. One, it is hegemonic. When it is when you hedge, there is a limited balance, a limited bandwagoning. So you might say that a lot of ASEAN countries are having limited bandwagoning towards China, joining the BRI, joining the IIB, developing very close relations with China. It also develops binding engagement, engaging China into a lot of activities within ASEAN, so that China also has an interest, a stake in the peace and stability of ASEAN. But there's also limited balancing against China, to some extent. Indonesia and a lot of ASEAN countries also develop close relations with the United States, with Japan. When China is approached for economic interests, the US is engaged mostly for wider security interests. Although we also see that a lot of ASEAN countries want to diversify its dependence on China. That's why it's very important, the role of Japan in playing a counterbalancing role to China's economic prominence, and also trying to attract the US and India also to play more roles, not just security role but also economic role, but also dominance denials. It's not just denying dominance by China, but also denying dominance by all the other powers. So that's the role that ASEAN will continue to play, and I think that it is going to be increasingly difficult if the conflict sharpens. But the whole point of ASEAN is trying also to find space so that very, very head-to-head conflicts can be avoided. So Indonesia and ASEAN will continue to carry out this hedging plus middle power diplomacy.
Right, thank you for the response, Prof. Dewi. We actually have time for one more. We have 5 minutes remaining. Perhaps that's enough for one more short question. So if you're called upon, please make your question as short as possible, so that we can stay within the time limit. Perhaps there's only three hands raised. Perhaps from I see Professor Shafi. Please. You can unmute yourself first, though.
Okay. Hello, good morning, Professor Dewi.
Hi, long time no hear.
Long time friends, yeah.
Long time no see.
It's very interesting and very enlightening lecture in this regard. But my short question is that, what should be done by, middle power in stopping this possibility, or just what I call breaching the situation related to the war between Ukraine and Russia. Why I'm saying like this? Because so far the situation is getting worse and worse, and there is a possibility that third world war. Yeah, because President Zelensky already declared this. That if the negotiation between Ukraine and Russia will not be able to make a positive result, that's creating the possibility of third world war, which is very, very dangerous for the future of international order. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, that's a such $6 million question. If you know the answers to that, then maybe the war should not have happened in the first place. What can middle powers do? I think that middle powers continue to play as a world conscience. We need to continue to face the humanitarian suffering, to continue to remind, Russia to cease its attacks against Ukraine, and Indonesia, as we know, also focus on more about humanitarian corridor and so on and so forth. But the most important thing is, maybe middle power countries in relevant positions. Maybe we are too far away. Countries in Europe and so on. Trying to facilitate dialogues which sees the broader picture, so not the zero-sum game, because clearly Russia has specific perspectives, Ukraine has specific perspectives, Western countries have specific perspectives. But if we all want absolutist gain for itself, the conflict will never end. So the role for middle powers, I think, is to act as a world conscience, to remind the world about the danger of wars, and to raise public awareness about the need for humanitarian support, and again, to try to continue to call for dialogues. At the moment, there's little less, not much that we can do, but we need to continue to call for the cessation of hostilities and to pay more attention to the human rights of all sides. ASEAN countries need voices, Indonesia needs voices, so in many forums, we need to alert the international community of the danger of the conflict continuing and more sufferings and discussion, and to ensure that let it be lessons learned for us in the region, where there are so many flashpoints that we should never ever take peace for granted, so that it needs to continue to nurture it at all times. and try to resolve various differences through dialogues, and also develop real linkages so that the cost of conflict will be very high for all sides, so that we do not get tempted, to do provocative behavior, which could get out of hand. Because a war is easy to start, but it's very difficult to end.
All right, so we're actually right on time. I'm just going to give a very short conclusion of the lecture that has followed. So Professor Dewi has provided a very comprehensive analysis of the current state of international relations on a global scale, noting that complexity is definitely a defining feature of today's international system. And amidst this complexity, there is reason to believe that middle powers actually hold a significant amount of potential. But the problem now is, how will this potential actually materialize? Then that's dependent on so many factors. And well, the way that I see it, as middle powers, we have to realize that they have this potential to shape the system based on their own image, but that doesn't necessarily need to be an international system that is revising the status quo. So everything is still up for grabs at this point, and that's, I think, the challenges that are going to be there in the future. So that's my short conclusion. And before we close, because this is the last and final lecture, FPCI has prepared a special video to close the Southeast Asia Lecture Hall. So please enjoy the video, committee.
Thank you very much, Agus.
Hi, this is Dino Patijalal, founder of the Southeast Asia Lecture Hall program. I want to thank everybody who has joined this program in the last 10 months. So far, we have had about 50 universities across Southeast Asia and about 20,000 people, students and lecturers joining and listening to the lectures provided by the Southeast Asia Lecture Hall program. The aim of the lecture hall from the start has always been constant. That is to provide access to Southeast Asian students and universities wherever they are to world-class, high-quality academic lectures. And our students don't just come from Southeast Asia. We've had registrants from Mauritius, from Seychelles, from Nigeria, from Japan, China, United States, Germany, and many, many other countries. This is totally an open program, and I'm very happy that many have found our program useful, and we look forward to seeing you in the next phase of this program, which will begin sometime in August this year. And I look forward to see more of you in the future programs of Southeast Asia Lecture Hall. Thank you very much.
So I hope you have enjoyed that video, and I'm happy to say that the Southeast Asia Lecture Hall has certainly brought students and lecturers of Southeast Asia closer together as an academic community through this shared experience. We expect this program to continue, hopefully in the second half of 2022. So please, everybody, please keep in touch through our WhatsApp and Telegram groups, and also to stay updated through FPCI's Instagram page and Southeast Asia Lecture Hall website. Thank you once again, Professor Dewi, for delivering the final lecture, and to everyone attending and supporting this program. Don't forget to fill in the form in the chat box. That will give you the link to receive your e-certificates. Now, please stay safe, and we hope to meet you again in our future events. Okay.
Right. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. There's so many difficult questions that I've not been able to answer.
Right. Those are very critical questions.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Prof. Dewi, and thank you, Pagas, for joining. I'll put us in a breakout real quick.